Well, welcome to the first CBI of the year. CBI stands for Chicago's Best Ideas. So that might sound immodest. So I thought I could just begin with a word about the history of the CBI movement, as it's called. CBI was this idea we had at the centennial celebration of the law school's existence. Like, gee, why don't we have lunchtime stuff free, you know, and then talk about the great ideas that came out of Chicago. So we ran out of those after like 2 weeks. And then, you know, the question is, what's a great idea? So, for example, one of Chicago's best ideas is having free lunch. That started that year with this series, the idea that you could bribe people into learning more by giving them food. I don't think anyone had ever thought of that before. And then, like, the second great CBI idea was that when the CBI begins, everyone who hasn't opened their soda can opens it, so that you don't make noise later in the session. Watch. And like, no one else has ever thought of this. It's one of Chicago's truly best ideas ever. And then there are large-scale best ideas, like, you know, the Coase theorem or this or that. And I do want to start with one of these great ideas, although as you can imagine, as this lecture series has gone on for years, it also now is trivialized in a little. It comes down to Chicago's petty ideas. You know, small ideas that are percolating up, and maybe some of them will amount to something. But I'll try to be true to the tradition of the CBI thing by linking my small idea or two into the large idea. And so that's where I want to go. So the large idea is collective action problems. Well, a phrase that's probably quite familiar to all of you, if not most of you. And it's really about if you can understand law much better if you have a feel for collective action problems. You know, what do I mean by that, and what's an example of Chicago in that? You know, I think law for a long time was really about moralisms. You know, people thought, you know, what is natural law and what law could be derived from ancient text. And these ancient texts never explicitly discussed, even the Constitution, which is not that ancient, never explicitly discusses, look, here's the central problem of a society. You got a few million people, and they all agree they want to do something, and then they say, well, it costs money, give me money, we'll do it. And then, of course, some people will hold out and go, oh, no, I really don't want to fight the enemy. I don't really want roads or something. And that's called a collective action problem. Governments have known that forever. They know they need to coerce people a little bit. You know, once the majority votes for something, then everybody's got to pay taxes to support it and so forth. So this idea of a tension or a balance between what you force on people and what you don't. After all, as soon as you tell the majority that it can do something and force the minority to go along for fear of holdouts, as we call them in collective action problems, then of course right away the majority does too much. You know, the 60% of us that like certain kinds of music make the 40% of you pay for it. We might even just pay for you to build roads in front of our house and not in front of your house. So this idea of the tyranny of the majority, the imposition of external costs, collective action problems, free riders, holdouts, all this stuff and how it's reflected in law, that is, I would say, a very big Chicago idea. That is, Chicago didn't invent collective action problems, but it was at this law school primarily that people began seeing that in law you could reflect or see the reflection of collective action problems. So, for example, and one close to my minor topic of the day, bankruptcy law. Right, the old idea of bankruptcy law was, well, we got to give people a fresh start because what's the point? No one wants to work once they're in debtor's prison. They give up. It's not a great idea to put them in prison. It's not fair. It's not moral. It's not this. It's not that. And look, if we would just let them have a second chance, you know, really the society would be better off. Their families would be better off. So let's make it really uncomfortable to go broke. But if you go broke once, maybe even twice in your life, let's have, you know, embarrass you, but then let's let you start again. And then in the modern era, of course, we can't let you, on the verge of going broke, take your valuable assets and give them to your cousins and friends. And so law protected against that with moral-based rules, fraudulent conveyance law, and the like. And then in the modern era, people like our own Douglas Baird came along and said, you know, there's really a much better explanation of bankruptcy law, or put another way, the details of bankruptcy law could be understood better. Even if all you want to do is understand law, don't think of it as moral approbation or opprobrium. Think of it instead as a serious collective action problem. Sometimes there are businesses that are really better off continuing, or people are worth more out of prison than in prison. In prison, they can't work. They're not doing their creditors any favor. So we need to think of a way when it looks like you're broke, or you might be broke. We don't want everybody rushing in and dismembering you, dismembering the debtor. This is something familiar to all of you from who have taken bankruptcy law. And so we need some device, call it bankruptcy law, that'll keep the creditors from rushing in and ripping the debtor to shreds when it seems likely that this is a debtor that would better off be kept alive. So the going concern value, as we call it in bankruptcy law. And this sort of reimagination of bankruptcy law as a collective action problem turned out to be very, very valuable. That's what Chicago has specialized in, and one of its great ideas, this reflection of larger principles, in this case collective action problems, inside of law. And it's there that my talk for today is best situated. And I want to talk about Ponzi schemes and go back and forth into this idea of collective action problems and then see where it takes us. Okay? Now, next step. So let's talk about Ponzi schemes a little bit. Some of you have some experience with them. You've lost money in a Ponzi scheme. Some of you have better experience with them. You've run Ponzi schemes. When I was a child, Ponzi schemes were very, very common. A rite of passage was participating in some chain letter. How many people here have participated? How many people here have ever sent a letter in their life, in this real letter? Wow. Another 5 years, that's all over. And how many people have participated in a chain letter? Yeah. How many people have participated in a chain letter and made money out of it? So when I was a child, that was very common. This was the heyday of Ponzi schemes in a way, of these pyramid schemes, and you'd get a letter, you'd be all excited, and you'd open it up. It sort of was fourth grade was, I think, the peak of Ponzi schemes. And you'd open the letter, and it would say, if you destroy this letter or do not follow the instructions, the devil will come get you and hell will break loose among your family. They're often associated with these wild threats. And you're sort of giggling, but you read on. And it would have a list of people. And the bottom of the list would usually be somebody you knew. In my case, it was Avery Newmark, was this across the street neighbor who would say, add me to his chain letter. And the idea would say something like, you'll see 5 names or 10 names on this letter. You need to send $1 or a picture postcard or something. You need to send $1 to person number 1 on the list. And then move person number 1 off the list, take number 2 and move them up to number 1, 3 to 2 and so forth, and place yourself at number 10 on the list. And move Avery Newmark up to number 9 on the list. But you need to do this and send it to 5 or 10 or whatever it would say. You need to send this to 10 completely reliable, trustworthy people who are afraid of going to hell. And if you do this, you will become a rich person. And you sort of see the idea that if there are an infinite number of people in the world and they all follow these instructions, then by the time you get to be number 1 on the list, you get zillions and zillions of dollars. So this is illegal, by the way. Sending it is illegal, responding to it is illegal, mailing the dollar is illegal. Everything about it is illegal because, as intelligent people can see, this is all fraud. There's 2 kinds of intelligence, by the way, here. Most of you, I think, have intelligence type 1, which is you're thinking, well, I would have moved my name up on the list and moved number 1 and just not sent the dollar to number 1. And then maybe other people would be stupid and send me the money. And, that's called selfish intelligence. It's not bad. Of course, the Postal Service has made money because you've sent 10 letters, I guess. Or, as we say today. So the Postal Service has lost 3 cents per letter because of the money you're spending. But then there's another kind of intelligence, which is the socially minded intelligence. And the socially minded intelligence says, well, this is just all a bad idea. I mean, it's a waste. It's spinning your wheels. It can't be right. That is, there are not an infinite number of people, and so this pyramid scheme is going to run out. That's true. So don't do it. It's illegal, blah, blah, blah. But, of course, criminals have more sophisticated versions of this. I mean, they have clever things. They say, I have an investment scheme for you, and here's a way to buy land. And that's, basically what Bernard Madoff did in our era. So we live in the midst of the disassembly of the most successful Ponzi scheme of all time, measured in dollars of whatever kind you want. And so, but it's a typical scheme, right? It's somebody who says, well, I don't know, you know, you can't invest with me. No, you're not sophisticated enough. And well, oh, you know so-and-so? Well, maybe, okay. And then you start asking questions, and it's, look, I don't want to tell you. It's not, if you have to ask, it's not for you. And you know, you should go invest with Vanguard. And then people begin begging, no, I've heard you're really good. I really want to invest with you. And eventually they get information. I says, well, yeah, I invest with him. And you know, whereas the market is making 3, 4, 5% a year, he is regularly making 11% a year for me. How does he do it? Oh, he has a great eye for investments. He's like a good hedge fund. He's this, he's that. Look, you should talk to so-and-so. And then you go to your country club or charitable event. And you say, I hear you invest with Bernie Madoff. Notice the person's now calling him by his first name and everything. He goes, yeah, you know, it's been real. How long have you, 15 years I've invested with him, and I've made 11% a year for 15 years. Wow, that sounds pretty good. So-and-so's made 18% a year with him. Yeah. And more people invested with him, charities, universities. And if you'd go ask Madoff questions, more on this later, the more questions you would ask, he would say, well, look, I can't tell you my secrets. I mean, it's probably not for you. If you want to, you know, I understand, well, you might want a lot of information, but if you want transparency, then you need to go invest elsewhere. You know, look, I'll give you a statement every month. I'll tell you where we stand. I'm not promising that we'll make money. You know, he would act very modest and so forth. Now, most people can't pull this off. I suspect that if I told you I had an investment scheme going, you know, I doubt anybody. I think laughter was polite there, but I don't think you'd feel good about entrusting me with money, especially not in the middle of a lecture on Ponzi schemes. But apparently it worked. But we're going to turn later to all the people who did not invest with Madoff. But it turns out a lot of people invested, and you know, just to give you a sense of the proportions, you know, about $18 billion with a B was really lost. That is, there's $18 billion still missing, if you will, even with all the money collected. And you know, forget about the only people made believe they lost. You know, I thought I was making 11% a year, 18% a year for 15 years. I thought my original $1 million investment was now worth, you know, 4.1 million. Now those people say, they tell the FBI they lost 4.1 million. I mean, they lost 1 million plus a reasonable rate of return on the 1 million, I guess. So that we call that, the first one, the paper losses, and the second one, sometimes they're also called the statement losses. You know, going by the statements you received from the criminal. I mean, I don't know what good that is. But going by what you thought, you relied on it. So, you know, a university thought it had $4 million in that account. It knew that it had invested 1 million, and now it has 0, let's say, or 2 million after all the recoveries and the like. So that loss, that is whatever, if they have 2 million, they're better off than before. But if they have only 100,000 now, that means they lost 900,000 of their previous investment, and maybe more if you take into fact that they could have taken that $1 million and invested it in the Hyde Park Bank or in the Levmore Strategic Fund or whatever it is. In our period, before we get to the analysis of this, we're now in a period where the trustee is going after, I mean, the little tort law while we're at it. So, you know, of course they go after the wrongdoer, the mastermind Madoff, and he's in jail now. And, you know, by the way, doing investments apparently for other people in jail. I kid you not. And he probably knows something about investments. But anyway, so he's in jail now and will be there not only for the rest of his life, but allegedly for 99 such lives. So he'll be in jail a long time. But so the trustee has taken away all his money. They've sold his apartment. They've taken away any diamond rings that he had or something. But they're trying to go after other people. The novelty of the Madoff case has been that the trustee has gone after banks and feeder funds and sophisticated entities and said, well, you made a lot of money because you either believed Madoff or played along with it. You're very sophisticated. You should not have fallen for this dopey criminal. And why'd you go along with it? Oh, well, you were making a lot of money investing for people. How about Madoff's law firm? You know, there might have been a law firm that over the years helped draft contracts, sign things, did employment contracts. You know, in some sense, that law firm benefited by the existence of the criminal. If you were a partner at the law firm and you suspected that your client was really a crook, rather than turning the crook in, you might say to yourself, well, I won't invest with him because I don't want to lose money, but every month I'll do legal work for him, and then he'll pay me the bills at the end of the month, and that will seem like a tit-for-tat transaction. And maybe it can go on for 15 years and I can make a lot of money out of it. It's sort of like, that might seem shocking to you, but imagine that there's a gold rush. Who made the most money in the great gold rush in California? That was the question. The merchants, right? I mean, there are these famous studies of this, and the tailor that went out there, or the seller of pots, that was the sure way to make money out of the gold rush. So imagine a false gold rush. Don't tell anybody there's gold right behind the law school. And now let's say that spreads around, and tomorrow thousands of people come and they dig it up, and you and I go out there and we sell frying pans or whatever it is people will use today to hunt for gold, or those little metal detector things that you see kids and their grandparents running around with on the beach. We might make $1 million selling metal detectors out there in the backyard, and it doesn't occur to anybody later on to say, aha, we were part of the fraud. Although in a sense we are part of the fraud, and the trustee has that attitude in a way, is trying to get at vendors and other people who in some sense, well, as you could see, that's not totally a successful strategy. But in tort language, you could think of it as a plan of going after the second best cost avoider, right? Madoff's gone. We've deterred him as much as we could, and apparently criminal law wasn't enough. Throwing him in jail wasn't enough, and he's done his thing. And now it's a very legal thing to try to find other people who were in a second best position to bring this fraud to an end. So he's had some successful and some not. But here's the rule of law, the one we're going to challenge today. The rule of law is that if you invested in Madoff, so you're an investor and now you invested $1 million and you lost it all or most of it. Actually, let's make it fun. You invested $1 million, he told you it was worth $4 million, and along the way you took out $200,000 to pay to go to law school. Okay. So you think that you've lost $3.8 million. Law might say you've only lost $800,000. You put in $1 million and you took out $200,000. A normal person would say, I mean, anybody with common sense would say, no. You invested $1 million, but that was, 10 years ago. Let's say that $1 million should have grown to $2 million by now. Let's just pick a 7% or something rate of return. And well, that's even a little high. It should have grown to $1.5 million. Okay, you lost 1.3. I think that's what we would say. Law doesn't say that, by the way, in this area of law. It says $1 million you originally invested, you're not entitled to profit. You lost 200,000. You took out 200,000. You're down 800,000. All right. So now what happens? Well, here the current rule, which is widely available. You don't need me to tell you this. You probably know it already. The current rule says that as long as you are totally innocent, as long as you are totally in good faith, there's a lot of complexity here. Parts of law wants to know that you were not in bad faith. Parts of law wants to know you were in good faith, depending whether it was actual fraud. But we're not here to do all the law stuff. Let's just get the rough rule. The rough rule is that if you're in totally good faith, you are really this innocent investor who believed Madoff and then went to law school and you didn't pay any attention to it. You're not more sophisticated than everybody else or anything like that. Then we let you keep that $200,000 because, I mean, you took out your own money. You had $1 million sitting there in an account that was yours, and you went and took it out. Let's do a little side trip here. It's important to get that down, even though the money's a little bit mixed together, and think of it as part of the law of constructive trust. So say, for example, that Smith goes bankrupt, and the sheriff shows up and puts yellow tape around Smith's farm or house or whatever, and says, nobody take anything, it's going to go to bankruptcy court, and we have to allocate all the resources that are here. And then Jones, the next door neighbor, comes and goes, whoa, before you put the yellow tape, yesterday is Mrs. Smith's birthday. Wait, I can't remember. Smith went bankrupt and Jones is next door. Okay, let's give the neighbor an N name. The neighbor is the Nidells. And so the neighbor Nidells, they say, wait a minute. Yesterday was Mrs. Smith's birthday and we brought over an apple pie and it was in a nice little, dish. So I just want to get my dish back before you lock this up. What do you think the rule is? Do you think that dish now belongs to the Smiths estate? Or do you think the Nidells, the nice neighbors, can go take back the dish, which was theirs? They were never giving the dish, they were just giving the apple pie. And law has been clear about this from Hammurabi's code forward, which is, of course, they can take their dish back. That is, we think of the dish as held by the bankrupt in constructive trust. It wasn't theirs. They were just hanging on to it. So if you lend somebody a lawnmower and they go bankrupt, you can go take your lawnmower back. Now, of course, if really what you did was sell them the lawnmower and you sold it on credit, now it moves completely into the law of secure transactions and bankruptcy law and the like. But if you really can identify the thing that's yours and take it back, you get it back. So that's what our innocent investor says about Madoff. Says, oh, you were holding $1 million of mine. I was hoping you turned it into $4 million. But certainly that $1 million is like the apple pie dish. And I did take a piece of my dish back, the $200,000, and I get to keep that. And law has always said, yeah, of course. That's okay. But as for the rest of your claim, whether you want to think of it as $800,000 or $3.8 million or the interest or whatever it is, even let's just think of it as the $800,000. For that, you become a creditor. The guy owes you your money back. He unjustly took your money, but he unjustly took lots and lots of money from people, and maybe didn't pay the cleaning crew either. And all of you are creditors in bankruptcy, and you're all going to share pro rata. Somebody who has a 1.6 million claim is going to get twice as much as you do with your 0.8 million claim, and so forth. And so all that money goes in, and maybe you'll get back 50 cents on the dollar, 10 cents on the dollar, what have you. So let's just now try to focus on the incentives. What's the law trying to do there? Well, first it says if that was your pie dish, you get it back. And then as for the rest of it, we want everybody to be treated the same so they won't dismember businesses that are not Madoff but are really going concerns. But I guess we also want to make sure that people who think Madoff's a crook and know better, if you know Madoff's a crook, we don't want you to say, give me all my pie dishes back and run away. We want you to, call the SEC, call the FBI and say, oh, the guy when I was in the Smith's house giving them the pie, I could see that they were running an organized crime operation. And, really maybe you should shut them down. And we want to encourage people to help shut the Madoffs of the world down. After all, the longer that chain letter keeps going, the more billions are coming in and are potentially wasted in yachts and giveaways and other things by Madoff. So ideally, we want to shut down it's the opposite of a business. The business we might want to have go on, Madoff, we want to shut down right away. And in order to shut them down faster, we say to everybody who should have known better, the more you took back your pie dish knowing what was going on, the more you saw organized crime, the more you should have known organized crime, the more you don't even get back your $200,000. So, for example, if Madoff said to you, when you say, can I invest with you, he said, well, okay, you see, I always let people with number 45 in their chest invest with me, and 45, I'll pay you 45% a month. That's how good I am, 45% a month. Now, we're not going to let you get your $200,000 back. Because now any judge will say, 45% a month? I mean, you must have known that I was a criminal. I mean, no real person, any real person who could make 45% a month is not going to give it to you. And so if I'm promising you 45% a month, it must be that I have some incredible get-rich scheme where I need your money in order to steal their money, and you should know that. So that would be an example of bad faith. Now, it's easier to do that the higher the promise is, the more you don't look into it, the more you're a sophisticated guy. But you get the idea, right? The more you're innocent, the more you get back to $200,000 if you took it out already. And the more you're seen to be in bad faith or should have known better, the more we want you to end the Ponzi scheme. So the idea of this rule that is requiring good faith is obviously that when I say to you, I'll give you 45% a month, we want you not to invest. Even better, we'd like you to call somebody. So if you already have money invested and you say, I'm thinking of making another investment, law loves you. Now when I promise you 45% a month, law wants you to call the SEC. And the way to do that is to say, you're on notice now that this guy's crooked. No one can pay you that much per month. So, you're not going to get your money out if you invest more money. It's not a good idea to keep investing in the Madoff scheme. Now, I should say a couple things about this. One is it's kind of a stupid rule. That is, it might be the best we can do, but it's kind of a bad rule. I'm going to have to speed up now. It's kind of a bad rule, I think, because we have all sorts of biases, right? It's very hard after the fact to know who's in good faith and who's in bad faith. I mean, the first problem is that after the fact, everybody who invests in a scheme looks like an idiot. In fact, these people were not idiots. So I actually went to summer camp with one of these people who invested. And he invested millions and millions. I mean, he was a feeder fund into this thing. And I can't decide whether he was a criminal or opportunistic or was duped by Madoff. He knew Madoff very well. He's in the newspaper all the time, and he kind of hides his face in pictures, and so much so that I don't want to say his name. But I knew this guy pretty well. He was not an idiot. So he's as smart as you are, and we are. I mean, he's a smart guy. So, something about Madoff, either he really saw this is a great pyramid scheme and I can make millions out of it and he'll never get caught. That seems really unlikely. I mean, one day the criminal's going to get caught when he can't bring in more money. Or he was duped. He thought Madoff really had a way to make 11%. There could be some crime involved. Maybe he thought Madoff had some insider information. I don't know. I can't imagine how you'd send millions of dollars of your own money. This guy is very, very rich. So he'd send probably 10 to 20 million of his own money, his family money, and then another $200 million of other people's money there. It's really hard to imagine you could do this knowing that Madoff was a criminal and would eventually get caught. So I think part of it is that after the fact, I've had this experience in an organization I was on the board of, and we were looking for a new investment advisor. Every advisor we would go to would say, well, did you lose any money in the Madoff scheme? And one of them did, and the others would all say, of course not. I mean, people came to me for years and said, you can invest money through equity, blah, blah, blah. I saw right away what a fraud. No, we do due diligence in our shop. Everybody's telling you that they're not stupid enough to invest in Madoff. After the fact, when you don't invest in something that goes down, it's very easy to say to people, any idiot would have known that. See, it's not so clever to say, everybody does it, but I am so smart that I knew not to invest in Madoff, because they can see that lots and lots of other people didn't do it. So it's not an occasion to look smart, but it is an occasion not to look stupid, which, as we know, is far more important than looking smart. So that worries me a little bit. There's also another kind of bias, a more Chicago bias, which is, if I know that 100 smart people who spend a lot of time invested with Madoff, I hate to say this, but it's kind of rational to invest in Madoff then. That is, I think if I had invested with him and you said why, I would say, well, this high school friend of mine who's got 100 times more money than I do did it, and he's very, very careful, and hundreds of other people did, and the Mets owners did, and Chase Manhattan Bank did, and the British did, and 10 universities did. I might say, it's not efficient to run around and do comparison shopping when other people are doing comparison shopping for you. So it actually is quite rational to follow the herd when other people are putting their money where their mouth is. Like, you might not want to follow the herd when people just, the Bears are going to win by 11 points. Yeah, that doesn't mean anything. But, the Bears are going to win by 11 points next week. I do nothing in life but follow the Bears, and I've invested $400 million of my own betting on it. Seems to me quite rational that if you have $20 to bet, that you might say, okay, that guy seems to know what he's doing. I'll copy him, if you will. So I don't really like this good faith, bad faith thing, because it seems to me that after the fact, it's, we're really very, very bad at doing it. But what else could law do? Well, here's one small idea. This is not worthy of a CBI. But one small idea is maybe we should change all of bankruptcy law. I never really understood bankruptcy law, I have to say. That is, where I come from, outside of bankruptcy law, and by the way, if you've taken that course, bankruptcy law claims to be empty. It says, there's really no real bankruptcy law. Bankruptcy law is just this method for doing a pro rata thing with non-bankruptcy law. Whenever there's law outside of bankruptcy, we go look there, and then we try to make those relationships stay put. Well, I'll tell you what happens outside of bankruptcy. Say everyone in this room invests in something, like Madoff, like a factory, whatever it is. And then you need some money, so you get a big dividend, you redeem some stock, and all that. And the rest of us, they just keep reinvesting all the earnings. And then after the fact, it turns out that the factory was only worth a quarter as much money as we thought it would be. And let's say nobody's bankrupt. Let's take out of bankruptcy. Well, now, that dividend we paid you? We would say, I'm sorry, that turned out to be a mistake. That is, we thought we had profits and we paid you a dividend, but it was a mistaken payment. It would be like, you're getting a credit card bill from MasterCard, and it said, your balance is, you have a credit of $4.9 million. Don't run out and spend it, because that money's not yours. It's a mistaken credit. And within the statute of limitations, the law will catch up and you'll have to give the money back. I mean, it's the right rule, right? Otherwise, before people wrote statements, before they filled out tax returns, they would spend countless hours making sure there was no error. It's much more efficient to have a rule that when you make a mistake, you can bring it back. There is some law here if the other person reasonably changed their position and blah, 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 blah. But there'd be nothing reasonable about my running out and spending $4 million when the bank mistakenly told me I had a $4.9 million credit. So outside of bankruptcy law, we would just say these payments, that taking $200,000, that was just a mistake. After all, we are all equity investors. It's like we're all partners. We all invested in Madoff. Now it turns out Madoff's broke. Let's all share equally. And I don't understand why that guy should keep the $200,000. The $200,000 that we gave out to him was really a mistake if there was no money in the box at all. So that's one piece of my mind, that I don't really understand the whole bankruptcy law thing here. I think there is other law that bankruptcy law could have looked to, namely mistaken payment law, if you will, equity law. Think of them as shareholders. That seems to me a much, much better description of Madoff. Is it a good idea? I don't know. If you think that people like you will scream to the SEC knowing that you can't even get your $200,000 back, then it would be a good rule. If the idea was to get people to blow the whistle, then give them a stronger incentive to blow the whistle and say, if something goes wrong, we're not even going to let you keep your $200,000. Might be a good rule. When you want your money out, if Madoff delays a little bit, or, well, do you really need your money? And you get your $200,000, you might say, that was a little suspicious, how long it took him to write the check, and you should go blow the whistle. Whereas current law has it much better off for you just to take your money. You got to act as innocent as you can. As soon as you say, hey, wait a minute, it took them a long time to write the check, now you're like in bad faith if you don't do anything about it. So that's one possibility. I, by the way, prefer the opposite possibility, and let me tell you why. Have you noticed when you read about the Madoff case, and I've now gone and read about many of these cases, well, what do you mean we want him to blow the whistle and call the SEC? The SEC was called in and audited Madoff 5 times. I have found this to be true in every Ponzi scheme you look into. I realize there's an adverse selection problem here in what you get to research, but you go look at a scheme, another famous scheme that over $1 billion lost, is you go look at the scheme and some of the investment people were FBI agents. They invested in it, and they were suspicious fraud. They went and investigated, and they didn't find anything. Look at the public relations. I mean, the Madoffs of the world get to tell the skeptical investor, I know you think 45% a month is a lot, but the SEC's been here 5 times. Because other people also thought it was too good to be true. And you know what? Clean bill of health. And he's invested too. FBI, local FBI director. Okay, need I say more? And that's pretty convincing that the SEC. So what do you mean? Can you imagine if you had been another person calling on Madoff? Oh, I'd like to report that when I tried to get my $200,000 check, he hesitated. And they would say, we've been there 5 times already, and the guy's as clean as a whistle. You go, yeah, but I think you should take some agents off other cases, and you should go back to his office. Who are you exactly? You're a guy who got your check slowly? I'm like, why in the world would we think that you're marginal blowing the whistle? You'd be a crank. I think it would be logical for them to think you're just somebody who, Madoff pushed ahead of you in line at the grocery store or something, and you don't like him. So I have lost anytime I was impressed with whistleblowers, I've kind of lost interest in them as a result of reading about Ponzi schemes. If anything, there were too many whistleblowers. The SEC goes there over and over again. The FBI goes there over and over again. And it's like Keystone Cops. And we don't need more whistleblowing. You know what we need? We need more exiting. Exiting is what works. That's much faster. The way to get a Ponzi scheme to end fast and minimize the loss is that when you're suspicious, I want you out of there. And when you're suspicious, I want you out of there. And if every time people were suspicious, they pulled their money out of the scheme would collapse very quickly, right? These schemes need more and more and more money to keep the pyramid going. Every time somebody exits, it's very painful because they have to run out and find new investors to bring in money in order to be able to have money to pay the old people so that there's no revelation that they're a criminal. So I actually would prefer the opposite idea of my equity, let's all be partners idea. I would like a rule that says, if you exit quickly, you're doing the rest of the world a favor. We want people who are skeptical to get out of there, and that'll collapse the scheme quickly. Now, how do you do that? Well, the easy way to do that would be to say, whatever money you take out, it's yours. Now, that could be very expensive. It could be you take out $4 million because your statement said $4 million, even though you put $1 million. That might be a little bit too dangerous even for me. First of all, Madoff and you could collude. You might really be his third cousin. And he might say, you know, I'm about to be caught. You only put in $1 million. It's gone. But how about make believe that your paper does say 4.2 million. Why don't you take out 4 million? Then Levmore's rule will see you as an early exiter and will let you keep the 4 million, but I'm going to collapse anyway. You know, that's a little bit risky. But I would at least let you keep your $200,000 plus a fair rate of interest, which is much more than law gives you now. So you can keep 400,000, let's say, if you took the money out after 10 years. It would be the opposite of the first approach in a way. Reward exit might be the way to go. We're going to see other examples of this in a minute. All right, enough Ponzi for a while, but that's what I think we ought to do about him. Let's move to what I think of non-Ponzis, and then you'll understand why I titled the lecture the way I did. So let's think of semi-Ponzi schemes, I'm going to call them, because they're not quite Ponzi schemes that have afflicted our industry. So let's think about fraud in law school placement statistics, for example. So fortunately, this is not our problem, so we can analyze it at a distance. But there are law schools out there. You can read the lawsuit claims as well as I can. I will have a word to say about admissions fraud too. But as you'll see in a minute, the placement fraud is much, much more interesting. So imagine a law school. I mean, it's not important where it is. I don't want to defame any law school that might be named after the third president of the United States or anything. But imagine a law school that said that it had 80% of its graduates placed in law jobs, and that in fact the truth turned out later to be 20%. So you notice I've structured the numbers for more likely than not. I mean, I've tried to do everything right. So there are some people getting high-paying jobs, some people getting low-paying law jobs, and 80% of the class unemployed or unemployed in law. And yet new people are coming to the school, and donors and employers are all being defrauded because they're being told, even though we're a law school that's not ranked so highly, we really do a good job in our market, and 80% of the graduates, oh, you found a graduate who didn't have a job? Yeah, well, 20% of them don't have jobs. I guess you found one of those. So it's a little bit hard for employers to know whether the claim is fraudulent or not. And let's say that it turns out to be fraudulent in the manner I've discussed. So before we notice the Ponzi scheme aspects of it, notice what a hard law case it's going to be to win. Because if you're one of the lucky graduates who has a job, you're not going to have any damages, right? You've got a job, you're working in LA or San Diego or somewhere, and you're making $150,000 a year. I mean, where's your injury exactly? All right, so let's push them out of the way. Okay, I guess you might be an unemployed graduate. So you've been out of law school 2 years, you don't have a job, and your claim is, hey, more likely than not, you told me 80%, it's really only 20%, so I should get recovery. Well, you know, it's a very hard claim. First of all, there's a speculative element to it. We'll never know whether you would have been one of the people who would be employed. Second of all, we don't know how hard you worked trying to find a job. Third of all, you did get something of value. I mean, you got an education, and it might be that you'll get a job, you know, next year or the year after. So it's a little bit unclear, you know, what's your reliance exactly? You might say, well, either I wouldn't have gone to law school at all, or I wouldn't have gone to this law school. Oh, look, I had a scholarship offer from this other law school where 60% of the class is unemployed, and I would have gone there at half the cost. So I really lost a probability of a job and tuition maybe. I chose your law school because of its higher employment stats. That's a much, much better claim. Though again, as you could see, it's pretty much of a probabilistic claim, which we know are hard to win. It's also pretty much of a speculative claim. We don't really know what other law school you would have gone to. And again, I want to emphasize, the other law school you went to also would have given you an education, but maybe your education is better. I mean, first go prove that the education you got is not as good as the education there. So actually, courts have been and will be very, very slow to give these claims and knowing how to draw a line. Now, I think there are some good claims there. Probably the best claim would be, well, let's look at other law schools that have 20% placement rates and see what their tuition is. And probably their tuition is much lower if you look around, their net tuition. And therefore, I want half my tuition back, let's say. That's probably the best claim somebody could bring, to say, I understand your law school would still be there, but it would have been a much cheaper education if you hadn't lied about the employment stats. That strikes me as a much better recovery. You know, recovery from the law school, from the faculty of the law school, from anybody who you think should know. You know, part of the problem is that the fraud is often committed with only 2 or 3 people knowing about it. why tell everybody else in the law school? They too will abandon. What about a claim against other students? It's not a bad claim. Think of this claim. I sue someone who was graduated last year who has a high-paying job. And they say, what are you suing me? What did I do wrong? And I say, well, you are like the guy that the Madoff trustee is suing. See, you probably knew that the employment stats were a lie. Because after all, you had friends. Like you seem like the most sociable guy in the world. I used to see you at wine mess after wine mess. And I know that you had a lot of friends. It must be that I'm going to show that among the 50 people that seem to have the most hits on your Facebook page, 42 of them don't have jobs. So in fact, you were a nice, diverse guy. You had a random selection of classmates, and in fact, 80% of your classmates from law school do not have jobs. How could you possibly have believed that the law school had an 80% employment rate rather than 80% unemployment rate? You know what? You didn't tell anybody. You didn't blow the whistle because you were afraid then that employers would devalue your diploma. And so, just like a Madoff bad faith investor, you helped keep the fraud going by not revealing anything in order to escape with your good job and keep the fraud going. What do you think? What's bad about it is that there's no bankruptcy. I mean, there's not going to be bankruptcy because federal loans are there. I mean, how can the school go bankrupt? I mean, look at us. I mean, are you kidding? It's very hard to go bankrupt. It takes extreme talent for a university to go bankrupt. And these universities are not that good. And second of all, usually when we say let's go after the secondary cost avoider, it's because the primary cost avoider is bankrupt or in jail or both. Well, here, the law school or the faculty or the dean or whatever, they're still there. So it's a little bit hard to imagine the claim against the classmates or the previous graduates when the mastermind, if you will. But I don't know. I mean, you should think about it. Law might have a role to play there, and it might make people much better whistleblowers. Interestingly enough, unlike Madoff, it is an area where whistleblowing immediately leads to change of management, which is what you need, right? Even the hint that the law school is fraudulent immediately gets a few columnists out of it, and the ABA gets all nervous, and the chances are the dean is going to have to quit then or resign in shame, and then the new dean will come in and have every incentive to clean things up and show the alumni, this is what's going on at Illinois now, for example, or went on at Villanova, but although not about placement statistics. I do want to add there as an addendum, I don't think admission statistics are the same thing because there, it's very hard for an individual student to know that the school has committed fraud. After all, first of all, people don't go around normally and ask each other their college GPA and their LSAT scores. So if you have a 168 and you're at a law school that claims that its median is a 169, it's almost impossible for you to know whether that's true or not. It seems completely plausible. Again, I don't know how you would know unless, now it may be that if the school offered you a full ride, which is the Villanova issue, if the school offered you a full ride and said, we really, really want you, despite your C- grades, and you're 168, well below our median, as you understand it, we really find your other qualities just terrific. You might begin to think, really? I mean, I see these other people in law school, and they also were like president of the 4-H club or whatever it is people are putting on their resumes. And, let's face it, it's all about numbers, and it wasn't my grades, and my 168's well. So it might be that there are people who build up skepticism, but generally not. I mean, generally you don't have enough information, and generally they're not giving a full ride to people below their stated medians as opposed to their real medians and so forth. So I'm not as worried. I mean, I don't think it's as interesting in the admissions case. That's just a central fraud that's interesting. The placement one strikes me much more like a Ponzi scheme, and I think law might have something to do with that in the manner I described. Let's go the other direction for a minute. How about the real, too big to Ponzi, kinds of things? So intergenerational debt. Let me think about it this way. My generation, spent a lot of money, ran deficits, elected bozos to the presidency, and we really spent the country into oblivion. And we spent a lot of it on infrastructure, but we purposely built infrastructure that would collapse just when you were ready to drive over it. We wasted a lot of money. We looked for oil in the wrong places. We've gone to fight, play wars. I mean, we've really spent a lot of money, and we're leaving you the debt. Now you might say, well, I know, I've done macroeconomics too. We're not really leaving you the debt. We are the debt, rah, rah. But basically, I've led a pretty good, lush life. And you're in for a lot of suffering. I mean, I'm sorry, there's some LLMs in the room. And the country is going to be stronger than ever. And, we all understand that, and we know that we've got to actually start learning how to take square roots and stuff. I mean, it's time, okay? But meanwhile, we know that one generation, in a sense, voters, has spent a lot of money that it didn't have, that it borrowed for the next generation. It's a Ponzi scheme, right? I mean, it's not a Ponzi scheme in the sense of pyramiding, but it is a Ponzi scheme in the sense that it can't continue forever. That's what we're either going to find out now or soon. At some point, even the majority of the country will figure this out, that we need to change things. So what about that? I mean, can you imagine a claim? I mean, why don't you go bring a claim in court and say, well, there's this Ponzi scheme, and my teacher's generation borrowed a lot of money that they didn't really have, and they're committing fraud. I think we understand there. No, I mean, you won't have standing. We could find some ways that courts will say, not our problem. All right, but I want you to take this seriously, so I'll give a slightly better example. How about the housing foreclosure bubble thing? So, one generation, maybe my parents' generation actually, they overbuilt in housing. They borrowed money, maybe my generation too. The government made it easy, the government, meaning we, figured out how to elect people to drive interest rates lower than they really were. We made it easy to borrow. Oh, you're a veteran? Yeah, here's money. You're a student? Here's money. Oh, you're a widow? Oh, a lot of money. Everybody was getting money, whatever it was to qualify. Oh, your house is only worth $100,000? No. It looks like it's worth $1 million. Here's more money. We just gave everybody money, and we got them to add rooms and kitchens and bathrooms and decks. I mean, we overbuilt this housing all over the country as if we didn't know we were overbuilding it. It was kind of fun. And now, lo and behold, there are all these people holding houses underwater, and the banks were the only ones stupid enough not to realize it. And there's a kind of semi-Ponzi scheme. Again, it's only semi-Ponzi because it doesn't quite have the pyramid structure built in. And there's no line. It was more like, I'm going to give you 45%, and I don't have 45%, but that's okay because other people will give me the money and I'll give it to you. That's sort of the housing bubble, right? So it's all there on the front page of the newspaper. It's just everybody, it's pure Ponzi. Everybody thinking it's hilarious scam, but I'd be an idiot not to benefit from it. I mean, why should I stand by while they give money out and can't pay it? I mean, I might as well enjoy a bigger house. And then my grandchildren will pay it. And they'll be drowned anyway in climate change or something. I mean, what's the difference? That's the way the political system works. That's a little bit better. I mean, could you imagine going to court and saying, well, now I like the claim better because I think the claim is, wait a minute, let's go to somebody who sold their house for $1 million in 2004 and bought it for $200,000 in 1980. Say, the reason your house was so valuable is you were a beneficiary of this national, international Ponzi scheme. And it's fine. I mean, I understand you're in, you're out, you're everybody else, you voted. But the thing is, why should you emerge with this nest egg of $1 million? After all, that's really money that's ours. Let's put all that money back in the hopper and spread it among all the citizens. I have to say I like that scheme. Meaning I think a good political entrepreneur would now come and say, we could have a better solution to the foreclosure crisis by creating a fund, not by unknown new taxes that fall on all the same people, but we should actually have a retroactive tax. Let's go back to people who sold their house at some above market rate of return profit, and let's put rather than having a small capital gains tax on that, let's go back and put a 50% capital gains tax on that and take those billions back and then distribute them among the people who are stuck with the houses now. That might actually be a pretty good idea. Now, could a court do that? Of course not. Right? That is, no court would be that brave. Can you imagine a court saying, I know where to go? No. And so that's what I mean by law's domain in the title. I mean that judges and we kind of understand that all these situations are the same. But they sort of understand that the Madoff one, that's really pretty big. Let Congress pass a statute called the Bankruptcy Act telling us how far they want to solve a collective action problem. And then we courts will do our best. I've tried to suggest that Congress and the courts might have picked the wrong one, this good faith one, and maybe they would have been better off picking another one namely we're all in this together. But they're entitled to pick the solution they want, and they can make mistakes. So at the legislative level, we solve that collective action problem, and then we enlist courts to improve it a little bit in the micromanaged cases. At the smaller level, the law school semi-Ponzi case, it's a bigger case in a way, but it's smaller amounts of money. At the smaller case, I think we will see a role for courts there. That seems like law's domain. That's what judges think they do well. They take an individual fraud or semi-fraud, they try to figure out how to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, and they'll try to do that. It'd be very unlikely to find a legislative solution there. But the bigger ones, the housing bubble, intergenerational debt, it's either too big for anyone, or it really requires the people. I mean, people, meaning a political entrepreneur, would really have to run for office on something like that and try to create a general sense that there is a better way of reallocating wealth based on the windfalls that people got in the past. Again, it's very, very unlikely to happen. It would take a really right kind of leader who framed it right and maybe not show the losers right away how they were going to lose. I mean, it would be hard. But it might be the right thing to do. Again, I would say we understand somehow that it's outside of law's domain. It's too big. We don't want to trust any single judge or any single court to do that. We probably wouldn't even trust one legislature to do that, and that's why it would require something of a political movement. So again, to summarize in a sentence or two, collective action problems are all over law. They're all over most frauds, and it's kind of useful to try to think of a level at which they're pitched. If you just hit the right level, then somehow or other it belongs in this building. Then we call it law. But the very same principles are at stake in things that are too large for us. They don't even do them in the Harris School. They're like, no, it's debt, politics, go, war, no. So big that we don't think of it as something to discuss and change and apply political or legal rules, unless there's really a wholesale change, large-scale political, almost revolution that brings it about. But at the small level, we are missing a lot of opportunities. Law school fraud is one of them. And no, we know that's our stuff. It very much belongs in this building. And we will send people, maybe not to jail, but we will come up with the right combination of right, meaning some combination of restitution and tort and bankruptcy and this and that. And we will make those cases change a little bit and create different incentives, because we can see that reputation and market pressures alone are not doing the job. So we have time for just a couple of questions. I'm sorry to have gone on so long, but I welcome your questions. And it's important that you have some. Yes?
So in the Madoff context, what if you thought of it in terms of competition policy? That is, you gave Madoff's competitor a private right of action, so you avoid the SEC's potential inefficiency, with a loser pays provision to get a remedy, which is an injunction against discontinued operations.
Yeah, so the question is, maybe we're missing the best monitors here. Maybe Madoff in some sense is competing against Vanguard. And so maybe Vanguard, instead of everybody being quiet and being like in a gentleman's club, maybe Vanguard should be blowing the whistle on Madoff, and they should be more cutthroat against one another. I don't have anything against it, although a private right of action really doesn't do us any good. It's like you still have to give somebody the power. Can you imagine the competition policy you have in mind? What a razor's edge. Vanguard's going to go to court and say, we need an injunction against Dreyfus. They're fraudulent. Dreyfus will say, are you kidding? I mean, they're trying to get rid of us because we're their competitor. And I'm not sure that we would really ever want to trust a judge at the injunctive level to decide whether this is fierce competition or one of them is fraudulent and one of them is not. So I think it's way too risky. It would be like the University of San Diego calling the ABA and saying, you need to shut down Thomas Jefferson School of Law. Probably the ABA would say, you're the worst plaintiff, because you're going to gain a lot if that law school across town shuts down. It was like when there were accusations against some law school on Chicago Avenue that they were employing lots of people in the library. People would come to me, I was dean, and say, oh, you need to expose this. They have non-law jobs. They're kind of, I don't know whether it's true or not true. And, you really think the University of Chicago complaining about Northwestern's reporting is going to be the right way to go about it? It's probably the kiss of death. So although I like the fact that you got dressed up to ask a question, and I like that you asked the question, no! I think it's really, let me get somebody else. We need 2 more questions. Don't be shy, please.
In the Madoff case, where you had a lot of charities losing money and universities, is it can you assign any kind of like primacy on, because a charity lost money, we're going to pay them back?
Oh, you have in mind treating them better? You could do anything you wanted. I mean, I guess there are areas of law, maybe inheritance law, where we're slightly nicer to claims by charities than to other claims. No, I would say the collective action problem was even worse there, because the boards of directors are the same people, and that's what's, the reason those charities had Madoff money was that the very same people were on the board. It's sort of like you're at a university and someone wants to give you donations, and then they say, oh, but how's your endowment doing? You don't want to diss their advice about where to invest the endowment. That's why schools, by the way, universities, often have third-party endowment managers. Oh, we have no control of where our money goes. Because every donor, oh, but I have a shopping mall in Florida you should really invest in. So no, I don't know. I'm not a normative guy, but about here, no, I stay away from those guys. You don't want to be nicer to the charities. They are the problem in a way. You want them to be even more careful about how they invest because of these conflicts of interests on their boards. So no, I have no sympathy for them. And in fact, if I'm a big believer in charity, anti-market as it might be, meaning I try really hard to give money away, but charities that I know that I've seen where they lost money in Ponzi schemes, then I don't want to give them. Their fundraising letter, oh, we lost $20 million with Bernard Madoff, give us more. No. I think that itself is a collective action problem, and why should you reward them for their bad management and all that? Now, if they said honestly, it might seem bad now, but we rationally followed the herd, I'd be really impressed. But they don't say that, right? They say, oh, we would do. And time for one more. Please.
Don't you think the final point you made about the retroactive tax would basically drive real estate investment out of the country and kind of drive down property prices and exacerbate the problem?
Right, so the very, very good question is, oh, wait a minute, you had this idea of undoing the Ponzi scheme by having a retroactive tax on the people who got windfalls. Well, they thought they were brilliant real estate investors. Now we know they were just political insiders. They just got a windfall being at the right time in the Ponzi scheme. And if we take the money back from them, won't this discourage all those very successful foreigners, like, say, Greeks, from coming here and investing in our country? Because, no, I think the answer is no, it should wash. Because after all, there are just as many foreign investors who think they lost money, but now we're going to hand money to. We're going to say, oh, you thought you invested in American real estate and then it went down? Well, we have a different system from other countries. We go back retroactively and take money from the windfall winners and we give it to you. So actually, in our country, you don't lose as much money as you lose elsewhere. And ex ante, that might be a good insurance. It's essentially an insurance policy I have in mind. And I think that might be just as attractive to foreign investors as unattractive. Now, I understand that when people invest, they're usually optimistic rather than pessimistic, and it's not quite a wash. But no, I feel okay about that, and there's no logical reason why they should run away. You might have turned that question on the Ponzi scheme itself. That does worry me. In the Madoff case, for example, if I know that the early exiters are going to get rewarded, then I might think next time, I'm not a sophisticated guy, I'm just a law professor investing, and I'm not going to be one of these guys who has skepticism and knows to exit. And I'm going to, instead of getting 50 cents on the dollar back, I'm going to get 5 cents on the dollar back because the early exiters are going to get rewarded by Levmore's scheme. So you know what? I don't want to invest at the outset in businesses. I'll just invest in mutual funds. I don't want to invest in businesses because you get rewarded for being sophisticated and knowing to leave early, albeit because you're collapsing the Ponzi scheme ostensibly to benefit people like me later on. That does worry me, but I think that's great. I don't believe that individuals who are that innocent should be investing in businesses and stocks. Anyway, we belong in mutual funds. We don't know what we're doing, and we don't want to know what we're doing. So we are better off hiring intermediaries and diversifying. But that risk does bother me, but it doesn't bother me in the real estate. So that's what a CBI is, and thank you very much for coming.